Welcome to the Agronomy and Farm Management Podcast. I'm Amanda.
And I'm Elizabeth. Thanks for joining us today.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Agronomy and Farm Management Podcast. Today, we are going to talk a little bit about what we're seeing in the fields. It's been an up and down spring, as it usually is. So we'll talk about around the state, what we're seeing, and hopefully provide some information to you to make some decisions moving forward. And joining us today to help us with this is Dr. Jason Hartshoe. He's been on before, but we have a new title for him. So welcome, Jason.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda and Elizabeth. It's good to be here with you today.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you do for Extension, remind our listeners, and how you came to have your new title?
Yeah, so I'm an extension field specialist in dairy management, precision livestock. Part of that, I work in feeds and feed quality. So do some agronomy work, mostly revolving around forages and feed crops. And if we think about feed crops here in Ohio, corn and soybeans fall right into that, just looking at them from a little bit of a different perspective as to making sure that they're a high quality feed to go into our livestock industry that's thriving here in Ohio. And that's kind of how I came to get this new title. Was I've been working on a PhD in ag engineering, looking at the utilization of indwelling rumen boluses for monitoring temperature in dairy calves and using that as a tool to identify calves for further diagnosis of potential illness.
Well, that sounds very complicated and being on the agronomy side of things. Glad someone's handling that.
Yeah, sometimes the agronomy side seems easier than the livestock side. Neither one will actually tell you what's wrong, but it's a lot easier when a plant's sick to make some hard decisions than when an animal's sick.
Yeah, I remember when I was considering what I wanted to do for my master's, I was doing genetics and someone asked me why I wanted to do plants and not animals. And I had a pretty long list topped by plants don't usually kick you or try to kill you.
Yeah, plants don't kick. A plant, we rely on Mother Nature to provide us with rain and sunshine and the right temperatures. And, those right temperatures, like right now, I'm fighting pneumonia in some cattle barns where, yeah, we might be fighting crops that are a little yellow today, but at least I'm not trying to decide how much to open curtains, close curtains. Who needs antibiotics, who's sick, and who's just, not appreciating the cool weather and has a morning cough.
I would say after the couple days we've had, some of our crops, if coughing was something they could do, would probably have a little cough. If you're listening, we're recording just after we had those very cold temperatures over the weekend. That's one of the things we want to talk about today is what we're looking at in terms of the damage and how we can address that moving forward. But I think we wanted to start off by talking a little bit about planting progress because every year we talk about how regionally there's so many differences between North and South Ohio and the conditions we're facing. This year might be one of the biggest differences we've seen in a long time. I know down where Amanda and I are, we're pushing probably nearly complete on planting for a lot of folks. A lot of folks are done. I got some phone calls there at the end of April saying that they were done, which is unprecedented for us. It feels like I don't know that I ever remember a year where we were this far along in April. But up your direction, Jason, it's a totally different story.
Yeah, we have a few guys that have made some good progress, but I would say we're just getting started. We're a long way from done, and it's interesting. So going through all the winter, right where I'm at, I was just outside of the winter-long drought. Just north of me was that region that was in a drought all winter. Couldn't catch enough moisture to move out of that drought, and in 1 week, they moved out of that drought and went from field conditions that were too dry to field conditions ever since then that haven't allowed them to get back in the field, or only maybe been able to get on some of those driest fields and gotten a little bit of planting done and have a long way to go. So it's a very different story depending where you are in the state.
Yeah, and even down here, we had the opposite situation where we were out of the drought, but still a little dry. And then once we hit April, we went a pretty long stretch with no rain at all or very little rain. And we were really starting to hit some flashy drought conditions, which is a term I didn't know anything about until a few years ago, but it seems to be a common occurrence now. So we were really relieved when the rain finally did turn on down here too, but it's also come with cold temperatures, which is not the ideal situation when we've got a lot of stuff that is imbibing that first water and then trying to survive in the conditions in the field.
Yeah, it's really reminding me of last year a little bit where we had great planting progress and then it turned cold and wet for about a month or so. We've made further planting progress this year, I think, than last year. So really need to keep our eye on a few things, see what this cold weather damage happened, and then we can talk a little bit about some disease pressure and things like that.
Yeah, it feels like it's gonna potentially be another one of those years where if you weren't one of those guys that was out the first couple days and got some crops in the ground, if you saw the neighbor planting and thought, oh, it's just a little bit too early, and a week later you thought, okay, it's time to go. That guy that it felt like was a little bit too early, he might be the early bird that gets the worm again, just because that crop is a little bit further along. That's kind of going to depend if, I don't think from what I've seen, there's no corn that has that growing point out of the ground, so the corn's probably going to be okay. Just as long as these cold temperatures didn't frost the soybeans the last few days, is really what's going to depend on if that early bird gets the worm on soybeans. But it's the crop that hasn't emerged yet that has me the most concerned.
Yeah, and so just a reminder for corn, that growing point does stay below ground until V5, V6. So we've seen corn get frosted off after it has, 3, 4 leaves even, and it will come back at that point. However, soybeans are a different story.
Yeah, once that soybean's out of the ground, it's at risk of being frosted off. I think they say say 4 hours at 28 degrees, but it may not be 4 hours at 28 degrees on your thermometer. It's in that microenvironment that the plant is in at soil surface level and wind speed, rainfall before that, all those things affect that microenvironment. The one thing I liked about having to replant soybeans is, you don't have to line the rows back up or make a decision for the whole field. They're a little easier when it comes to, okay, I'm going to go patch that spot that was in a microclimate back in, but it's still a pain, to have to make that decision and walk the field and figure out what spot maybe needs replanted.
Yeah, I think really the main thing we want to probably emphasize here is don't make any quick decisions. In the first couple days, that's when things are going to really start to look bad. Just monitor it over the next week, or maybe don't even look at it for the next week is maybe the best advice. And then here, once we get a little distant from those weekend temperatures, go out. Luckily in the forecast, it looks like it's going to be wet, so you're not going to have the opportunity to replant in the next week anyway. So it's going to give you time to assess rationally, and we do have some tools to help you make those replant decisions available. I don't know if Jason, you want to talk a little bit about those?
Yeah, we have a few tools there. Our ag engineering department's working on some drone-based tools for like soybeans and corn for doing those crop scouting. But to go out, whether it's the hula hoop method or just counting soybeans or corn in a row to make those replant decisions. And soybeans, it's really about soybeans in an area. Maybe you dropped 130, 140,000. But some of the research from Dr. Laura Lindsay and others here at Ohio State have shown that we can actually get by with, 60, 65,000 soybeans and they'll bush out. But the big thing is that they're kind of uniformly spread out. If you have 140 in one area and zero in another, obviously that doesn't work. So walking those fields, but don't get in a hurry. Give them time. That's the thing that always stresses me out on soybeans is you walk out and it's like, well, I don't have enough. And you go out another week later and there's 10,000 more. So when you're right there on the verge, there's a chance you might make it as they kind of finish coming along, pushing through. I do think it's worth having that honest conversation with your seedsman and say, hey, I've got half of my soybeans planted. Some of them are probably going to make it. I don't know where I stand. That lets them start thinking through what they may need to do if you have replant decisions. Don't expect them to have all that sitting in the warehouse for you tomorrow when it dries out if you haven't had that discussion yet.
Purdue has a really nice photo gallery of what soybeans can look like 1 to 2 days after, and then about a week after, and might help you discern, if that cotyledon bud survived or not. So we'll put that in the show notes for you to check out.
One thing I would just want to state too is it's supposed to be a little cooler in the forecast. So the timeline for some of that recovery may be a little slower with the heat units that we're maybe not going to get over the next few days. So again, patience. Luckily, that rain might hold you out of the field and help with the patience if it's not your strong suit.
Yeah, that's a good point. 1 week out might be a little bit longer given the
And,
forecast.
we have natural recovery, but the other thing we're going to fight that you're going to need to be out scouting for is those soil-borne diseases, our fungi. So your pythiums, your phytophthora, your rhizoctonias, all of those like cool, wet soils. And that's exactly the scenario we're going to be sitting in. And it all depends what seed treatment you use because they all have different half-lives or the amount of time that they're really viable in the field to control those fungal diseases. And a lot of them sit around 2 to 3 weeks. Now, there's some that'll last a little bit longer than that, maybe 4 or 5 weeks. And it's kind of rate dependent also, depending how much of that active ingredient you put on. So if you plant it into a little bit drier conditions and it took that soybean a little while to come up, we had talked earlier about some soybeans that were planted on the 17th of April. We're sitting here on the 4th of May. So that's 18 days. So, we're past that 2 weeks. We're quickly approaching that 3 week time point where that fungicide may not be as viable to protect that soybean as it goes through these cooler soil conditions. Typically, we count on it warming up. And yeah, that soybean might get some infection by those fungal pathogens, but it's growing so rapidly that it outgrows them. And it's not going to do that. So that's going to be another thing when you're out scouting to look for those diseases and see if they're impacting and going to cause damping off that may take that population backwards on you.
Yeah, and I feel like we should mention slugs real quickly. Episode 185, we talked about slugs and why it was so bad last year. And as I said, again, this year we're seeing some emerged crops, but they're going to be really slow growing. So they're going to stay at that vulnerable stage for a lot longer and maybe not be able to outgrow slug feeding. So that's another thing you'll need to watch out for. Elizabeth, you were down in some of the coldest area and also probably the furthest along with wheat. And up where I'm at, we're maybe 50%, maybe a little bit further along with heading. Jason, I don't know, have you guys started heading yet?
Yeah, our wheat hasn't really started to head. Some of our cereal forage crops, like cereal rye, has just started to push heads out. Triticale, it's kind of right there in the boot stage. Wheat's a little bit more protected. The heads, flag leaves out and the heads down just enough that we're hoping we're going to be okay on the wheat side.
Yeah, but you have fields, Elizabeth, down your area that are completely out. So maybe we should talk about wheat damage as well.
Yeah, I would say there's probably a good stretch here south of 70 where that wheat headed out about a week ago, and we're probably in peak anthesis right now, which is when that crop is the most susceptible to cold temperatures. The again, for most of these crops, that rule of thumb is really 28 degrees is that temperature to watch for. And I know at least at our house with my weather station, we were flirting with that temperature. And there's the two components. One's how cold it gets, and then the other is how long it stays cold. And we didn't quite hit 28, but at our house we were below freezing for a few hours on Sunday night, which is not ideal given the timing of our wheat progress. But it's again kind of with those soybeans, it's going to be a little while till we can tell what the impact really was.
Yeah, so you may or may not see some bleached coloring if you did have damage. It may just be you're going out and finding that you don't have any kernel fill.
That little bit further north where we're not quite, where those heads are just emerging, as those heads come out, be sure you scout those fields to see that they're coming out properly because that head can actually kind of get pinched at the top of the plant where it doesn't open up properly after a frost. And then the head comes out into kind of a curl out the side of that sheath as it splits out. And a lot of times those don't pollinate correctly either. So there's definitely gonna get your steps in this spring with the importance of scouting.
Yeah, I think it's definitely something to keep an eye on. Yeah, that I like how you describe that. It's like we talked a lot about tassel wrap in corn last summer. This is the wheat version of tassel wrap. The other major decisions, this is the point of time where we're investing a lot of resources into our wheat crop. If you're spraying, and you may be considering that given the forecast, the rain and the temperatures. So again, being patient and monitoring the progress to decide if those resources are worth investing is going to be critical from a profitability standpoint this year.
And we're talking about the way the wheat's progressing, and we think on the forage and feed crop side, our cereal grains that fall in that same family as wheat. There was a lot of them harvested here over the last couple of weeks, depending where you were in the state, trying to hit that, last leaf to flag leaf emerge for the highest quality. And now we're going to be rained out and really challenged. The cooler temperatures will slow down those growing degree days, but as that plant continues to progress, as that head comes out, quality continues to decline. It doesn't mean it can't make feed. It's just not going to have as high a feed value. A lot of times you'll see that crude protein decline, and depending how you're planning to handle it, if you're going to bale it as baleage or something like that, you still want to get that harvested as soon as possible. As that head matures more, we actually can hit our highest energy content in that plant when we're at soft dough. So actually letting that grain fill a little bit, digestibility goes down at the forage portion, but energy goes up. The challenge with that is if you're not making silage out of it, those berries stay wet longer, and you end up with a lot of variability within that bale for baleage that doesn't ferment properly. So that's a little bit of a challenge. Probably trying to get out there whenever field conditions finally allow, and get that mowed so that it stops growing, and don't let it get rained on too many days, because rain does leach out some of the nutrients from it. Energy's been shown to go down, potassium levels go down when it gets rained on. But if we can stop that growth, we do maintain some of the digestibility. If it maybe just gets rained on for a day, and then we're able to roll it and get it baled or chopped, whatever we're trying to do with it. And, our alfalfa and alfalfa grass mixes, those winter annual grasses, cool season grasses, they're progressing rapidly. So watch for those to come out and head here soon. A lot of things are 1 to 2 weeks ahead, but Mother Nature is definitely going to slow them down here over the next week or so.
Yeah, I know here we were really excited about some of that double crop potential with as far ahead as we are in some spots. I think there's still a chance this might be one of our earliest double crop planting dates, which always makes that second half of the profit equation look pretty good when you can get decent soybean yields.
So maybe a little bit of a bright spot with our forages if we can get them dried down. I guess that's going to be our biggest challenge because they been scouting some alfalfa fields for weevil, and it's looking pretty good.
Yeah, there's some bright spots there at the forages. If we can get them dried down, we're going to have a little bit earlier first harvest, which may allow us to get 5 cuttings of alfalfa in. The big thing's going to be, as the weather continues to go up and down, making sure we harvest in time for high quality. What we see a lot of times when the crop kind of gets ahead of us like this is we get focused in on trying to finish planting corn and soybeans and spraying, and next thing you look out, your forages, especially those grasses, are mature, and then all of a sudden the alfalfa and clover are in bloom and quality is rapidly declining. So keeping an eye on those, and when we get that next dry spell, probably looking at whether you're going to make them as silage or baleage, most likely is going to be the quickest, or if we get that nice 4 or 5 dry days to make some dry hay. But think about, time to start making hay already.
When we started talking about what topic we wanted to cover this time, we were a lot more excited about talking about the crop progress and the way things were going, and things really took a tough turn here over the last week. I think the good news is it's still really early in the season, so we've got a lot going for us in terms of turning it around. Plenty of season left. So a little bit of a downer of an episode, but big thanks to Jason for hopping on and talking to us, and we'll get some resources in the show notes.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Agronomy and Farm Management Podcast. Join us again in 2 weeks for our next episode.